Article recorded on April 3, 2023 by Sybil Mann-Baylor for educational sharing on AlfaeOmegaCriativa. Article author TARSOCabrini. 1 full professor I Doctor of the Department of Law, Faculty of Law OAPEC, Santa Cruz do Rio Brown, State of São Paulo. Discipline: Portuguese Instrumental. Title: Impressionism and Taoism. Abstract: Impressionism was an artistic movement that peaked in the 1990s 1880 in France, reaching a popularity that extends to the present day. The term Impressionism initially used only to designate an arts movement. Plastic arts, especially painting, extended to music, and, if we take into account the great scopes of the word, even designates a critical way of seeing the arts, which originated the term critical impressionist. This article, within a tradition that relates the 19th to 20th century Europe to oriental arts and philosophies, seeks to establish points of contact between impressionist art, that parties, and Chinese Taoist philosophies. Keywords: Impressionism, Taoism, literature in the 19th century. When James Liu (1926–1986) began publishing his books on Chinese literature and arts in the United States in the 1960s, he may not have known that he was inaugurating a critical current that seeks to elucidate and strengthen the relationships between the East and the West, through similarities noted between its artists and critics. Found in Professor Pauline R.U., President of the American Council of the Learned Societies, one of his greatest followers, and, in my opinion, one of his admirers. The terms East and West have been banned from cultural studies since some time. But, there is no way not to use them, in the present work, since talking about the end of the 19th century, the period in which the terms were well marked. We believe that these concepts have not brought benefits to both sides of the old world, but effects of globalization. The fact is that the boundaries between West and East have, if acceptable, and there is a price, on both sides, to pay for it. With the intention of contributing to the studies initiated by James Liu, we place the following question: why pictorial impressionism, and impressionism, seen in its manifestations, is so similar, philosophically and formally, to Chinese art, especially that developed over 6,000 years under the generic name of art intuitionist. In the words of Liu 1962, page 81. For Liu id. Hibbett, intuitionist art is strongly dominated by a feeling coming from the Taoist school of philosophy, founded, involuntarily, by a book, the Tao Te Ching, and propagated mainly by the classic of literature called Chuangzi 4th century BC. Its characteristics are contempt for logical thinking, discursiveness, to the objective, which makes it an art for the sake of art that, paradoxically, despised art, understood as a social object for use by alcoholic elites. A gratuitous art, free of a goal defined as Friedrich would say, referring to Mallarmé Friedrich, 1978, page 114. But, for us to start our discussion, we have to bear in mind, firstly, the social and philosophical scene of the European 19th century, and, whenever we get to the 19th century, without any other modifiers, we will be referring to the last 4th century. We should remember the impact of the Second Industrial Revolution, the accelerated scientific and technological development of the reward of Romanticism in its pastoral aspects, whose last sighs were captured by Monet and Proust, among others. It is worth remembering the somewhat arrogant rise of a term we call realism, and which had the power to remove what is most interesting from life, holding man in crucial aspects of existence. The European 18th century had imprinted an optimistic feeling in relation to the scientific and technological progress, and this optimism has reached the present day. However, one reality does not show itself as in Enlightenment treatises, simply because there is nothing logical and rational in human happiness, whose dependence does not rest on well-being and comfort, in power and greed, but only in the art of living together as a family, in inner peace. The collapse of religious faith at the end of the century was a significant shock, disregarded, perhaps, by the critics, most of the time jubilant with such a defeat. The fact is that, if experimental and calculating science promoted great improvements in the human knowledge, advancing our knowledge to unimaginable stops, incredible, we even suffered a spiritual helplessness easily observed in the multiplication of esoteric societies, at the end of the century, and which extends to the present day. This spiritual helplessness was felt not only by the mass of people coming from the countryside, but also the refined intellectuality, too educated to believe in superstitions, and intelligent enough to get involved in mystical adventures of the most varied kind. However, there was a belief that science and the modern spirit prepared, without knowing it, and without wanting it, for the reconstitution of ancient theosophies, through the means of more precise instruments, and on a much more solid basis. Edward Scher, Preface to the Great Initiates, 1889, A Publishout, 1947. Page 20. It's the same as Leon says Denizard rival alias Gallant Cardiff in 1857, when, by publishing the Book of Spirits, started a religion that intended to rely exclusively on scientific data, so that to face reason, face to face, in any epoch of humanity. Cf. The Gospel According to Spiritism, Epigraph. The 18th century was not exactly marked by religiosity, although it was at that time that Freemasonry found fertile ground to spread. It was also the time of Mesmer, of Lavater, and of Swedenborg 1668 to 1772, of whom we shall speak more often, for having more directly influenced European poetry, especially French. The poet Charles Baudelaire (1821–1867) was one of the main promoters of this Swedenborgian doctrine, which is a plus ultra of Platonism. By Swedenborg, the world's spiritual events were anticipated, and the earth, with all its phenomena, found a parallel much more fluid, much more ethereal, in this atmosphere beyond the clouds. Not only that, but the concept that the earth is a place made up of objects that affect all our senses, and whose sensations correspond, forming a tissue that, today, we could call it a web if there is no other more appropriate name in physics, which described the combinations between the various elements and the composition of a harmonic whole. Perhaps the term string, but we will not venture to use it. Anyway, paraphrasing the famous sonnet from Baudelaire's correspondences, all the sounds and colors combined into synesthesias, which are manifestations of God's orchestration. But, of course, the word God would never enter the vocabulary of these late poets of the 19th century. This is the great problem of modernity, according to Friedrich, in his stupendous Structure of the Modern Lyric 1956. Let's return to Swedenborg another time. We will have to say that symbolism, as a characteristic movement of the arts, at the end of the European century, had no other attitude, but a scientific attitude towards the world, precisely in the eagerness to find support rational for the spiritual senses and feelings, thus constituting a research mystique by intuitive means and in the form of poetry, but a research that did not dispense with, by no means a rational apparatus. For many, symbolism was an anti-analytical and anti-scientific artistic movement, viewed that was very common in his own time. Cf. Michaud, 1947, page 107, and prevail until today, in Common Sense. However, what about Hugo Friedrich's book shows this very well. Symbolism is the son of the same scientific spirit of its time, proposing, however, a search for truth through intuitive research according to Michaud, 1947, page 52, and Theodor D. Wieswald, page 63. Saw, in Mallarmé, a poet who felt that the supreme source of emotions was the search for truth. Still, for the poet V.L. Griffin page 84, symbolism accentuates the traditions of the scientific spirit, as Lavoisier and Friedrich will tell us that, starting from symbolism, the poet seeks to act scientifically, experimenting, to create the unreal with the same exactness and with the same intelligence sought by the empirical sciences. Friedrich, 1978, page 57. Your coolness and hardness of heart, page 166. Its rigor will be figured, for example, in the poetic depersonalization undertaken by T.S. Eliot, page 163. We see, therefore, that the advancement and predominance of the scientific attitude, at the end of the century, provoked a contrary reaction, on the part of the intellectuals, towards a total knowledge of life, drawn necessarily from ancient or mystical philosophies, but which, at the same time, was carried out, with the same attitude of scientific research, by the poets more committed to the seriousness of poetry, which can be seen so beautifully written in the Stockholm speech by St. John Peirce, 1960, which clearly establishes the compromise that must exist between science and poetry, in the common search for the advanced scientific and moral of humanity. Cf. Peirce, 1994, pages 69 to 74. Your site indicated in references. Even the theory of correspondences outlined, in some way, already in Plato IVAC and developed by Swedenborg, found scientific support to develop even more, with the dissemination of research by Joseph Fourier 1788-1830 and Hermann von Helmholtz 1821-1894 to be left with just two renowned scientists, known to the greatest part of the symbolists of the 19th century. However, Baudelaire said, Michaud, 1947, page 22, those who are not poets do not understand these things. Fourier came to reveal to us the mysteries of analogy. Swedenborg taught us that heaven is a great man, and that everything, the form, the movement, the name, the color, the perfume, Both the spiritual and the natural things are significant, reciprocal, corresponding. Lavater translated for us the meaning spiritual contour, form, dimension. In this way, only the poet would be able to properly scrutinize and translate the essence of things and the universal analogy, the task naturally forbidden to the scientist, due to the requirements of his own postulates. Thus, Mallarmé would say, years later, that poetry is the expression, through the language human, of the mysterious meanings of aspects of existence. Michaud, 1947, page 15, and that there must be something hidden at the bottom of everything, something absconded, closed and guarded, inhabiting the common that only the poet could discover. The purpose of poetry would be reaching the unknown, scrutinizing the invisible, listening to the inaudible concepts that they already appeared in Baudelaire. Friedrich, 1978, page 62. Article recorded on April 3, 2023 by Sybil Mann-Baylor for educational sharing on AlfaeOmegaCriativa, the Tempo Adante. We will not forget, at this point, the great influence of Arthur Schopenhauer (1788–1860) on these poets of the late 19th century. For Rémy de Gourmont, the philosophy of Schopenhauer could be summarized as follows. Michaud, 1947, page 23. We know nothing but phenomena. We reason only from appearances. All truth itself eludes us. The essence of things is unattainable. Here's the which Schopenhauer popularized under this simple and clear formula: the world is mind. Representation. We know that Schopenhauer's philosophy is based almost exclusively on ancient Eastern philosophies, which completely disallow the use of sense data for understanding the essence of things, which is not strange in view of the words of Schur, in the famous preface quoted: "The spirit is the only reality. Matter is no more than its inferior, changing, ephemeral expression." Michaud, 1947, page 34. We do not know how much the German philosopher would have liked to be placed on the side of the mystic French, but the fact is that both share the same disbelief in the power of science understanding of the essence of life, and the same belief in the power of intuition to achieve that objective. Did 19th century science have this claim to take the place of religions and poetry in an orphic explanation of the earth? We cannot say for sure, but we know how much the sciences influence the formation of a thought, still very strong today, that rejects intuitive knowledge, religious or spiritual knowledge as scientifically valid knowledge. It is the case that, in another for the moment, we focus on this subject, a role of the sciences, at the end of the 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century, as an alleged substitute for religions, a fact that, nowadays, is observed, because scientists have circumscribed their observations to the world phenomenal, without venturing orphic explanations that go beyond the data of the senses. Explain the reason for human life based on statistical and physiological data. For example, it does seem to have been a temptation for intellectuals at the end of that century. In that sense, Schopenhauer's influence must have been very healthy, for he tried to return Western man the limits of his rational knowledge, although a certain distrust in relation to intuitive knowledge hovers, even today, despite all the advances made in the sense of fully justifying it. We think, particularly, of the advances made by physics, quantum, and how they demonstrate very clearly what Theodore D. Weiswell said in 1886. Every symbol, every molecule is pregnant with the universe. Every image is the microcosm of all nature. The play of clouds tells the poet the revolutions of atoms, social conflicts, the shocks of passions. AlfaeOmegaCriativa, 1947, page 64, or, still, what Francis Veal Griffin said, in 1907 An Idea, page 104, what characterizes symbolism is the passion for infinite movement, for life itself, glorious or sad, beautiful in all the multiplicity of its metamorphoses, agile passion and proteinaceous, blending with the hours of day and night, perpetually renewed, infinite and diverse like the wave and the fire, rich with eternal lyricism, lavish like the earth, vigorous, deep and voluptuous like the mystery. The beautiful words of the French poet are very reminiscent of the explosion of life that will check os fructus vitae, the quintessential Nietzschean book by André Gide 1897. Symbolist poets were well aware, therefore, that man is a microcosm, as the preface to the Symbolist Art, by Paul Oldham 1889 and Jean Thorel's article on the German Romantics and Symbolist French, published in 1891, where he speaks of the intimate correspondences that may exist between nature and man. Cf. Michaud, 1947, pages 36 and 61. Article recorded on April 3, 2023 by Sybil Mann Baylor for educational sharing on AlfaeOmegaCriativa. Article recorded on April 3, 2023 by Sybil Mann Baylor for educational sharing on AlfaeOmegaCriativa. The concepts of microcosm and macrocosm as they came to be disseminated in Europe at the end of the 19th century were nothing new in the East, in particular, in China, which developed many treatises of correspondences visualizations in the fabulous Marcel Reynat's book La Pensée Chinoise 1934. The ancient Chinese, based on surveys that we can only call geodesic, established a correct relationship between cardinal points, musical notes, elements of nature, numerals, tastes, senses, physiques, body organs, etc., in such a way that no building important to the empire, for example, dispensed with these treaties before being understood. It's what's in basis of what we adopt in architecture as feng shui. All Chinese medicine is based on in the same correspondences, since man is a microcosm. For questions techniques, it was not possible to include in this article tables from Reynat's book, but we left here the pages where they can be viewed. In the Brazilian translation, pages 112, 146, 192, 231-5, and the address of the website where the work can be consulted. In French, see references. Grant. He had such a treatise in his hand as the Hung Fan or the Yulin, and the Designate, the famous character by Georg Karl Huysmans. Would it be easier or difficult to set up your ideal scenarios and landscapes? But the time has come for us to get down to our main subject, Impressionism. Baudelaire, around 1860, already spoke about photography. He knew that it became known as the Salon of 1859. It encompassed modern life. The photographs were widely used by French Impressionist painters to give spontaneity to their paintings, dispensing with the artificial poses of the models in the ateliers. That spontaneity of the look, that capture of the hundredth of a second, is present in this fragment of Chu Hangzi, famous promoter of the Taoist doctrine, in China AlfaeOmegaCriativa, 1997. Page 323. Only stillness gives true knowledge of nature. Ever selfless, the Holy One, effortlessly and corrupting nothing in himself or out of himself, reflect, unchanging and pure, for they are not marks that penetrate and persist, like images infinitely mobile that constituted the universe. He knows in his integrity the entire nature. He knows her not with details, but concretely. He has represent correctly, but are valid momentarily. Any abstraction, any generalization and even any thinking by analogy and still more induction or deduction are prohibited. All science is impossible, especially history. Nothing it can endure what it was, except a brand. In the same passage of the book, Designate adds, completing the thought of the philosopher, only the fleeting reflection is an exact, complete, innocent image. There is no knowledge true outside the instant and the total ID. Hibbett. Let's see how these words are reflected on the face of it. From Wendy Beckett, 1997. Pages 295 to 6. Monet's contemporaries were used to controlling the inert images that painted in their studios, so that the works did not correspond to what actually was seen in real life, which never stops, but what you thought you saw. Monet removed these comforting certainties. He did this, most alarmingly, in his great series of paintings, in which he studied the same theme in different climatic conditions and different hours of the day. As the ambient light changed, so did the forms that, until then, were considered unshakable and permanent. Monet wore his bright palette to capture the optical effects created by natural light in a landscape of the country or city, paying little attention to details that were not essential and using extremely visible, very elementary and indiscriminate brush strokes, too, thus registering the scene quickly. The large series of paintings, to which the Nun and British art historian refers, could very well be those of the cathedral in Rouen, which Monet painted between 1882 and 1883. By demonstrating that a cathedral symbol of what is unshakable and immutable, really, changed depending on the day and the look, Monet was very far away, philosophically speaking, of his contemporary, still with the thought adequate to the past. However, he was very close to a 4th century BC Chinese. How can this be? We know that, in Monet's time, a great wave of Chinese objects, the Qin was invaded Europe, coming from the fall of the Qing dynasty and the ruin of its aristocracy. From Japan came the Prince by Haute Coursai, the painter from the end of the 18th century, who so much influence he had on Van Gogh and on many Impressionists. From the Universal Exhibition of 1900, in Paris, how many exotic things did not meet, starting a search for the ancestral, by the prehistoric, which can be seen in the sculptures and paintings of Pablo Picasso and Modigliani. There, Debussy knows Japanese music, and he will give us his Mimosa. Jimbo Prime's Lullaby from the Children Prime's Corner Suite, from 1908. But, despite all this contact with artists, It is in its own social transformation that Europe will find support to reflect a worldview that has a lot of Chinese in it, despite how paradoxical it sounds. One of the people most affected by Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy was Friedrich Nietzsche (1844–1900), a genius philosopher, full of contradictions, and author, among other books, from the Gay Science, from 1882, and Thus Spoke Zarathustra, from 1883. In both books, Nietzsche announces the death of God, an assertion that has become very famous, and is perfectly in line with the non-theistic philosophy of Lao Tzu, 6th century BC founder and voluntary of Taoism. We cannot qualify Nietzsche's doctrine as mystical, but, without a doubt, the death of God makes room for religiosities of great power of reconnection because it liquidates a personality in favor of reality. The myth is the myth, Lao Tzu already knew. Reality is superior to the power of words. In addition to having received an influence from the East that came from Schopenhauer, Nietzsche was a great admirer and promoter of the doctrine of Heraclitus of Ephesus, nicknamed the obscure 5th century BC. Heraclitus said that everything flows hand-rei like a river, uninterruptedly, over all obstacles. Everything flows. This is the idea of Tao for Taoist philosophy, and the word Tao was used already a long time before, so that the Chinese referred to both the notion of path, course, discourse, etc., and the element regulator of the alternation between opposites yin and yang that succeed each other in the constancy of this river. The principle which determined the harmony of this incessant mutation was not defined by Heraclito, or, at least, this was not recorded, an embarrassing fact, as it contributes to that later a philosophy falls into empty transcendence, to use Friedrich 1978, page 49. If he had been born a little later, in the following century, for example, when Alexander the Great conquers the East, so we might assume that Heraclitus entered in contact with Chinese philosophy, as we know that India, conquered by Alexander, held since the 6th century AC, an intense cultural exchange with China. But, such a fact did not occur, and the Greek philosopher creates, as if through a mediumistic exchange, the resemblance to the Chinese traditional philosophies. It is at this point that it is up to us to return to talking about Impressionism, because, then, we put on the agenda the words fluidity, movement and dynamism. Friedrich complains, in his book, of the empty transcendence that befell poets French, from Baudelaire to Rimbaud, passing through Mallarmé id. Hibbert. It is understood that the fight against the Christian religion, confused with the fight against Pharisaism, created a empty ideality, but only apparently empty. What is called art for art's sake sometimes it is the denunciation of a true transcendence, veiled by words, and depersonalized. The obscure, the language for beginners, archi-notions in Mallarmé, and, not least, in Chuang-Tzu, who is a philosopher wholly focused on the question of the insufficiency of language as a good Taoist cf. Tao Te Ching, Poem I, verses 1 and 2. The Tao is not the Tao, therefore it is the Tao. The name is not the name, therefore it is the name. Perhaps, contrary to what Friedrich thought, there is a true transcendence in symbolist poetry, but, The transcendence such as Monet expresses in Woman with Parasol 1875, also called Madame Monet and Her Son Beckett, 1997. Page 294. A young woman on a small ledge in the ground, where the grass and flowers hide 4 full views of her feet, seems to have floated there, carried by the beta umbrella. I don't know the term beta, radiant with the pure and simple luminosity of the instant. That colors never settle, any more than the folds and creases of clothing, which swirl against the glow of the clouds and the intense blue of the sky. Is there really, in such scenes, the need for the word God? It is well known that there was a serious attempt on the part of Mallarmé to create a religion of beauty through which the poet, in the midst of an island of spiritual purity, free from a precise objective, Friedrich, 1978, page 114, would compose his work Alchemy, in which he would have fulfilled his only duty, the Orphic explanation of the earth id. Page 57. Far from profane world, Mallarmé revolves around the absolute being, which he equates to nothing id. Page 96. Not an optimistic word, but the best that can be done by protecting the mystery. He would be even better. Silence. Article recorded on April 3, 2023 by Sybil Mann-Baylor for educational sharing on AlfaeOmegaCriativa. REFERENCIASBIDELIOGRAFICAS Beckett. When D. Historia da Pintura. Sao Paulo. Batica. 1997. Capra. Verhoef. Hotel da Física. Sao Paulo. Cultrix. 2000. Dodsworth, Alexei. A Fundamentato Oriental da Filosofia Ocidental. Filosofia. Ciencia e Vida. 1039. 2009. Pages 18 to 28. Friedrich, Hugo. Estrutura da Lírica Moderna. Sao Paulo. Duos, 1978. Huysmans, J.K. As Ibesis. Sao Paulo. Companhia das Letras. 1987. KARDEC. Gallant. O Evangelho Segundo o Espiritismo. Harris SP Instituto de Difusão Estrito. 1991. Laudza. De Dejingtao Teaching. Versalo Emchins. S/ls/is/d. Louis, James. The Art da Poesia Chinese. Editora da Universidade de Chicago. 1962. Martins, José Eduardo. Jankelovici o Misterio M. Debussy. O Estado de São Paulo. NOVs. N 272. Pac. 7. January 9, 1985. Martin, Scarlett. Interpretocos de Nichamundo e Fora. Filosofia. Ciencia e Vida. N. 39. 2009. Pages 6 to 13. Michaud, Guy. A Doubtrina Symbolist. Paris. Nizet. 1947.59 v4. 2013.3 CABRINIJR. Paulo Escritora Vista do Curso de Letras da UNIABE Unilopolis. V.4. NV Mero 3. Mato Agosto. 2013. Pers. São João. Discurso de Estocolmo. Disponível M. http://theprovince.blogspot.com.br/2009/03/poesia discurso de estoc almosanejohn.html. Baso M13 de Mayo d 2013 underscore 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 Pasaros Lisboa Hyena 1994 Grant Marcelo La Ponce Chinois Disponibel M http://classics.uk.com/reddit_marcel/12_underscore la_ponce_chinois/ponce_chinois.html Base so M 13 de Mayo d 2013 underscore 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 Joe Pensamentochens Rio de Janeiro Contrapunto 1997 U. Porline Urias Poéticas Chinesas y Simbolistas Revista de Letras Curtida PR Fedtra UFPR N82 pages 193 to 15 set./des.2010 Disponibel online 3 Seguido M23 de Mayo d 2013 Basiato M19 de Gento d 2013 O Birioto de Compartilhar Parondo Deficient Visual Sem fins lucrativas de sordo com a lane and 9.610 D19 the FEVER VIRO D1998 Corpicolo IV dos Limitacos Caos Biriotos Auto Reais Art 46 NATO Constitui Ofensaos Biriotos Auto Reais I. The Reproducao de Obras Literárias Artísticas ou Científicas para uso exclusivamente deficientes visuais Sempre que a reproducao sem fins comerciais seja feita mediante o sistema braille ou outro procedimento qualquer suporte para esses destinatários. Lei N 13.146 D6 DJULA Cho D 2015 Institui a Lei Brasileira de Inclusão de Pessoa com Deficiência Estatuto de Pessoa com Deficiência CAPITULOII DATDCNOLOGIAASSISTIV8 Art 74 Ignorantado de pessoa com deficiência são produtos, recursos, estratégias, práticas, processos, métodos e serviços de tecnologia assistiva que maximizam sua autonomia, mobilidade pessoal e qualidade de vida. CAPITULOIV do DIREITOEEDUCACO Art 27 The educacao constitui Birioto de pessoa com deficiência Pastorado Sistema Educacional Inclusivo todos os níveis de aprendizado ao longo de toda a vida, de forma a alcançar o desenvolvimento máximo possível de seus talentos e habilidades físicas, sensoriais, intelectuais e sociais, segundo as suas características, interesses e necessidades de aprendizagem. CINDA Parad ADUALICACAO A Comissão dos Direitos das Pessoas com Deficiência Proposta Q Exiga NAS Bibliotecas Públicas de Offer de Acessibilidades às Pessoas com Deficiência Visual como audio lidia rose, ed tecnologias cuadrando eso ao texto escrito por vias alternativas. Font, Agência Câmara de Notícias. CAPITULOIX. Do DIRITO Cultura. KO Esporte. KO Turismo EAO Laser. Art. 42. The Pessoa com Deficiência attempt by Realto Cultura. KO Esporte. KO Turismo EAO Laser igualdade de oportunidades com as demais pessoas, sendo ele garantido isso. Events culturais formado atoval. The programas de televisão, cinema, teatro e outras atividades culturais e esportivas formado civil. A monumentos e locos de importância cultural e espaços que defendem serviços e eventos culturais e esportivos. 1. Evidade a recurso de obra intelectual formado civil de pessoa com deficiência, sob qualquer argumento, inclusive sob a alegação de protocolo dos direitos de propriedade intelectual.